Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's weekly wrap. It's the 10th of April, 2026, and it's I and Mirko on the screen. Mirko, how are you, my friend?
Good, buddy. How are you?
I'm going really, really well. Mate, it is Friday, and it's a day before something very special tomorrow, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but it's a day before that. How's your week, mate?
It's been a good week, off the back of Easter. Well, 2 short weeks in a row because we were obviously not working on Monday. So chasing our tails a little bit, but it's all good. It's been a nice week.
It has been a nice week, and the markets have settled down too, and we've had a bit of a reprieve, I guess, in all the ups and downs of geopolitics and what's going on in the world, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Do you want to give us a quick update on the markets, mate?
Yeah, there has been a bit of a reprieve in the markets this week, and to be honest, today's the first day that we're seeing a little bit of red on the screen out of Australia. The US was actually trading on Monday, so we always like to take things seriously here. We'll turn anything into a 4-day weekend. So so they were open Monday. We weren't, but some big numbers occurred on individual days. Let me just take you through a couple of them. So on Tuesday in Australia, the All Ords was up 1.67. On Wednesday, it was up 2.74. So take that into account, and a little bit off today, 0.3. We're up 4% for the week, Luke. So a big week in Australia for the markets, which has been nice. The US, similar story. Nasdaq up 4.2. The S&P 500 up 3.65 for the week. The US had the US, the Dow was up 2.5% on Wednesday. That was the best trading day they've had since 2025. So, some sort of big moves in the market, and again, really volatile times that are very much so dependent on the news sound bites that we're getting. And it very much has been a case of, is there a ceasefire? It's on, it's off. Is the Strait of Hormuz open? Is it closed? So it's been a bit like that. I mean, to give you an idea, obviously the oil price is the big effect, but there's a broader effect across the world as a result. But the day that it was announced that a ceasefire had apparently been agreed, the oil came off 16%, so dropped to $94 a barrel. So just shows you how volatile even the commodities have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably more evidence sometimes not doing anything in periods of volatility is probably the best outcome, because obviously, when you're fearful, when you're listening to the media and all that kind of stuff, you feel like you have to respond, you feel like you might have to do something. And the reality is, if you do something, markets are very, very volatile in the sense, and when they bounce hard. And this week was evidence of that. So like all of a sudden, we were looking pretty ordinary last week, come back by 4.5% this week, and all of a sudden you're not far off record levels again very quickly.
And that's a really good point. And I think what we've seen over the last, particularly over the last decade, is that with market movements being so dynamic and so large over short periods of time, it's very, very difficult to sort of try and be the cleverest person in the room and sort of say, I'm going to be able to sort of time the markets. And like, what you do need to do is assess that strategy that we always talk about, make sure that you're not a forced seller, that you've got enough cash to deal with these sort of scenarios and not jump at shadows. And unfortunately, what has become, I walk down to the local store, pick up the newspaper, and I read it, is now 24/7 immediate information on your phones, on your tablets, on the news, on the radio. It does not stop. And the problem is there's a big question mark around, is the information in fact accurate? Am I being fed something based on some sort of algorithm that a system has determined is appropriate for you? Like, you know what I mean? So we're living in a really complex world, and we're actually seeing that with markets, that's for sure.
I'm glad you raised it, because I do think you're right on the complexity of the world that we live in, and in terms of what is true and what isn't true. And at the moment, we've got the United States saying the ceasefire has been negotiated, everything's great, America has won the war, we've obliterated everything from that point of view, and tick tick tick. And then we've got the Iranians on the other side saying, actually, yeah, ceasefire is there, but these are the 10 points that we've put forward. And these 10 points are very different to the 10 points that the Trump administration is talking about. So, according to the Trump mantra, in terms of their administration and the information coming through them, they're saying that the Strait of Hormuz is now reopened, which means that oil is now flowing. If we actually look at the data, however, the data is telling a very different story. 8 boats went through yesterday, which is pretty much reflective of what's been happening over the last month. So I'm not necessarily sure this ceasefire is holding on the way the Trump administration would like.
And the messaging, I mean, you'd hate to be trying to make decisions off the back of the messaging that's being received. Like, and I quote verbatim, this was on Donald Trump's Truth social media website, basically saying a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. This was written on Truth Social. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. So this is the sort of enormity of the situation that you're talking about. And then within 24 hours to turn around and go, we've done a deal, it's all good, we're kicking that can down the road. And imagine those poor people living in those countries that through no fault of their own are simply having to deal with this stuff.
Mate, you're right. And there's 2 points, I guess, to reflect on that. The fallout of what Trump is doing and the behaviours of Trump and the way he goes about negotiating or wanting to strike a deal, this is something which is completely foreign, something we're not accustomed to. There are those who are supportive of that kind of approach, but I think by and by most human beings who are in that normal category, they would be sitting back shaking their heads thinking, what on earth is going on from that perspective? So the interesting thing from a United States perspective is that there's been fallouts on both the right and the left. So the left, you expect the fallouts to occur because they're diametrically opposed to somebody like a Donald Trump. But when Trump's own supporters are actually going, enough's enough, and what you're saying is inappropriate, what you're saying is wrong, and to threaten a civilization with extinction is not the way one should behave, A. And two, you can't then 24 hours later then buddy up and then look to strike a deal where all of a sudden one of the points that has come out from Iran is that, yeah, sure, we'll let boats pass, but we're going to charge $2 million for every boat that passes. And now Trump is actually intimating that maybe he and Iran will come up with a deal where they both share in that fee. Like, you've threatened to blow them up sideways, and what, you think they're now going to want to pay you some money for that privilege? There's a lot of delusion about what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and I'm pretty sure that pride will get in the way of this. But if you looked at the playbook and what you thought might happen as a result of all the actions that have been taken, I don't think you would have factored it in playing out like this. And guess who's paying for it now? Yeah, your mum and dad's. They're paying for it.
Oh, look, this whole process has been a sham and a joke, in truth, Marco. And the dilemma there is we've had somebody who was either coerced or who had inflated views of what they're capable of doing start a war, which has led to a crisis of sorts, and they can't resolve that crisis. And we've watched that same person have dummy spits, blame everybody else, share no accountability or take no accountability for their own actions, blame everybody else for the outcomes from that point of view, and put everyone in a spot where clearly it's very uncomfortable. But I guess the interesting thing in all this is there is an opportunity for someone like JD Vance at the moment, who is the Vice President of the United States. He's now taking a central role in trying to negotiate this ceasefire and extend it. The thing that worries me, I guess, at the back of all this is this ceasefire is only for 2 weeks. And Trump notoriously has this tendency of just kicking the can down the road, hence the nickname Taco, as in he always chickens out. I guess from my end, JD Vance getting involved, trying to bring this to a head, we want to remove that 2-week impost, and we want this to become a permanent outcome. Do you think JD Vance is capable of such an outcome?
Yeah, look, talk about a person that would be walking on eggshells. He wouldn't, does he treat this as an opportunity for himself, or does he treat it as, I better be very careful the way I tread here.
Yeah, I think the challenge for him is I think there's a very real opportunity for him to illustrate why he could potentially be the next president of the United States. But I also think it's very clear why he could be decapitated by someone like Trump, who doesn't like to share the limelight with anybody. It's an interesting scenario. Now, Mirko, I want to talk to you about Australia for a moment. There is no question that we're suffering from what I would call fundamentally a disease of complacency, and Australia seems to move from crisis to crisis to crisis. And on the back of Matt Canavan, who had a speech at the National Press Club during the week, where he was talking about Australia's future, where there was actually a real big drive for a back to the past, and this whole notion of we need to bring back manufacturing, we need to bring in-house capabilities, and so on. I guess the question there is there's a lot of things that Matt Canavan is saying which makes sense, and we need to secure our own outcomes and so on. The question that plays at the back of my mind, however, is Australians have become accustomed to buying things at a cheaper rate. If we internalise a lot of these things, it'll mean that we're actually now paying a lot more than what we're accustomed to. Do you think Australians would tolerate that?
Well, I think the Australian public has actually voted over the last, couple of decades that they are happy to pay cheaper prices, and that's why we don't have any manufacturing now. So to change that mindset may be a little bit of wishful thinking.
Yeah, I think it's. I think sometimes the populist view or it sounds great in theory, and we all like the idea, but the reality there is ultimately when the consumer is sitting there and they've got product A and product B, and there's a difference of $10. If they were buying it just once, yeah, maybe no dramas. But if they're buying it consistently, they're not spending the extra $10 just for the sake of it. There's got to be a compelling reason why they would do it.
That's right. And I don't think patriotism is going to cut it.
Yeah. And look, I wonder about that, because I think if we think about Australia in terms of the challenges that we do face, what are some of the things that you think Australia could do that aren't necessarily nation building, but some of the things that we could do? Is it a question of making our tax system more conducive? Is it a question of reducing some of the bureaucracy and some of the imposts which are causing some of these problems? What's your view in that regard?
Well, off the back of Canavan's speech, one of the things he said is that we have a declining birth rate. We need to encourage the birth of children in Australia and the like, so that, we can become self-sufficient from a supply-demand point of view ourselves on that front. And, you can't disagree on that, it has to come from within. But the things that I would like to see sort of changed are the big picture stuff that, encourage business investment, encourages entrepreneurship, encourages innovation, encourages people to use their intellects to create things, to invent things. We seem to be not encouraging of any of that. For those of you that have listened to us speak, historically, I look at things like the US for love them or hate them over there. The reality is when it comes down to sort of entrepreneurship, innovation, like these guys are unbelievable. They, non-dilutive capital for startups in Australia is almost non-existent, whereas in the US, that's common, right? When someone presents a private equity opportunity to us out of the US, one of our questions is, how much non-dilutive capital have they received from government funding? Whereas you don't ask that question here in Australia because it's virtually doesn't exist. So we can fix our own issues, but we need to create an environment and a culture that sort of wants that to actually happen. And I feel that we're starting to lose that now. You start seeing some negativity creep in, and people sort of going, it's just become too hard to do business. In Victoria, in Australia, it just it's not worth my while making the effort here when I could be rewarded 3 times as much overseas. We've got to knock that on the head.
I think you're right. The other thing we've also got to consider is how do we skill our people in terms of making them able and capable to produce and be a participant in what is this new economic landscape. And I think going back to to technical schools, going back to trades, doing all those sorts of things, and teaching, and this whole notion of, sending everybody to university and giving them a quasi education which focuses on a lot of things rather than making you a specialist in anything, or concentrating your efforts, I think isn't yielding the results that we need from that perspective. So it's good that the points that you raise, it would be nice that if our politicians took those things on board, because this whole notion of having more kids, a la the Matt Canavan approach, yeah, great idea, but a couple of problems. With houses being so expensive, you can't afford to have a mum sitting at home looking after kids. The 1950s of mum sitting at home, dad going to work, being at home by 5 o'clock every day and having a Sunday roast and a white picket fence. That's a 1950s picture that doesn't exist in today's modern society. I'm not sure what he's seeing or where he thinks it's coming from. But, sometimes I look at these guys who do all the screaming about this, isn't it great if we could go back to what it was? The world has moved on. And I think we've got to be reflective of that.
Not a Sunday roast anymore, mate. It's Uber Eats. It's your front doorbell rings. There you go.
Fair enough, too. Now, Mirko, this week we also heard that the banks are starting to scale back some of their workforce, and AI is starting to bite there from that point of view, particularly around the roles which are repeatable, where the work can just kind of happen behind the scenes. Brings to question two things. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on unemployment, and that's going to cause the unemployment numbers to rise. And this is on the back of what's already happening in the tech sector and across other sectors. So you can't help feel that the tide is rising on the level of people out of work in that space. But I guess this also means it's going to make it harder, particularly for the older generation, as we digitalize the economy and digitalize interactions. How do the older generation keep up with all these things which are moving so fast and just not becoming nomadic in this new world?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think at a philosophical level, it needs to actually be tackled. I heard a really sad story about an elderly person that was scammed out of $20,000-$30,000 out of their bank account, and I was talking to the daughter of the guy that was in question, and he actually said to his daughter, "You know what? This is all beyond me now. This world has sort of gone past me." And what a sort of sad state of affairs to sort of feel that way. And you can see that people that perhaps elderly or haven't been retrained and don't have those necessary skill sets to deal with all this changes happening around them, how that can happen, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they don't feel left behind. And I look at it from a business point of view, what we do every day. Quite often we're in a position where we can't just assume that someone can use the latest greatest technology. And we quite often have to have a fight at an institutional level to sort of say, look, there's a handful of people, amongst our client group that we can't do this, right? We have to handle it differently. It has to be a piece of paper. It has to be a letter in the mail. And, it's actually very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's also incredibly unfair because we're so, as a society, we're so mindful of not taking people's agency away. But in this pursuit of efficiency, we actually are. And we're actually not thinking about the ramifications of these decisions. And it's not fair on a population which you can argue and say that the younger people need to get with the program, and I get that. And you could also argue and say, well, the guys in the middle should also get with the program. But I think rather than it's a bit like the transition plan with, do we move from what is current energy where it runs through transmission lines to a renewable world? Unless you've got a plan to get there, you're going to cause a lot of chaos. And I think what's actually happening at the moment is we're actually stealing away from what is the aging class. And, on one hand, we're saying we're trying to protect you, we're trying to look after you. But on the other hand, we're saying we don't care about you. And I think a lot of organisations probably need to think about what they're doing and the speed in which they're doing it, and then go, well, okay, it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach, but it's a size that maybe we need to make it, maybe we need to scaffold it in a way where it actually suits.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that front. We need to be cautious of that. The interesting point on the banks is that this is probably the first period of time where job cuts and AI have been mentioned in the same sort of announcements. In the past, it was like, no, this has got nothing to do with AI. This is, we're just doing things, making some strategic changes. Whereas now it's very open, sort of saying that actually these jobs aren't required anymore because we now have this sort of technology. And I think that what we're seeing with some of the software as a service companies getting whacked around with the stock market and the like are starting to reflect these attitudes as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Mate, did you happen to watch the football last night?
I only caught glimpses of it, but I did see the end result. First game of Gather Round in South Australia.
Yeah, look. One thing I've got to give South Australia credit. Gather Round has become a must-visit event on the calendar, and it looks like a lot of fun in Adelaide. And South Australia is a beautiful part of the world, without a doubt, from that point of view. And credit to the South Australian government and the Premier there who've driven this and developed this idea. And I've got to give credit to Carlton. Carlton gives me a lot of joy at the moment, being an Essendon supporter, because the way Carlton played that first quarter last night, they looked like absolute grand finalists. The way they came out and played really, really well. And then they delivered on the next three quarters to do what Carlton normally does. So to Carlton Football Club, thank you for renewing my faith in football and delivering the desired result.
I was hoping you were not going to say that, but you cannot take the bomber out of Essendon, can you?
No, you can't, mate. You can't. Now, mate, when we opened up today's session, I did say that tomorrow was a very special day. And tomorrow being the 11th of April, 2026, you are getting a year older, my friend. And tomorrow is a very big day for you. It's the 55th year. Is that right?
Are you talking about my IQ or my birthday?
I think it's a combination of both.
Birthday for me tomorrow. So looking forward to that. Going out to dinner, so it should be nice. And we were chatting about this over a cup of coffee before, and you and I have been plugging away as a team for 26 years already, and so no need to ask where the years go. That's ridiculous.
No, mate, we were reflecting 26 years, and when you first came here, you were 28, and tomorrow you're turning 55. Mate, all I'm going to say to you is you've been a wonderful friend, a most trusted business colleague, and someone who is just purely amazing and a staunch defender of our clients. So from me to you and on behalf of all our clients, wishing you a very, very happy GST birthday, mate, because 50 plus 10%. There you go, mate. You've nailed it. You've clocked life, my friend.
I do have to share the story that one of the staff go, Mirko, how come you don't have any of the grey hairs? And Luke just started shaking his head. He's been putting up with me for the last 26 years. No wonder the bloke's got grey hairs like everyone else around me.
Fair enough, too. I think my camera's just turned off too, so don't worry about that, mate. But look, mate, thank you for joining us today. To all our wonderful clients out there, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for keeping us on our toes. Good news is markets have rebounded from that end, so take that as a positive. Enjoy the coming weekend. I don't know if the weather's going to be too great, but just enjoy that. And to our wonderful team here at Innate Wealth, who work diligently to deliver the outcomes that we provide, thank you to you as well. Until we meet again next week, take care and all the very best. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.